Picture this. April 19th, 2026. Snow. Actual snow accumulating on the ground, falling on flowers that had bloomed 3 weeks early because March was the hottest in 132 years of recorded American climate history. Snow on cherry blossoms, snow on tulips, snow on the lawns of people who had already put their winter coats in storage, who had turned their heating systems to summer mode, who had, with the supreme confidence of people who had just lived through a 91-degree April 17th in Washington, D.C., assumed that the cold was behind them. It was not behind them. It had gone around, and it came back, and nobody was ready for it. This is the story of what is happening to the American spring of 2026. Not just the single cold snap that hit the Northeast and upper Midwest in the third week of April, but the larger atmospheric mechanism behind it, why AccuWeather is now warning of another substantial cold snap settling into parts of the north-central United States before the end of the month. And why the specific scientific explanation for what is happening, a residual polar vortex core, a stratospheric final warming event, and a negative Arctic oscillation flipping the atmosphere from a stable winter pattern to a highly volatile spring setup, means that the cold is not done with you, even as the calendar is insisting it should be. Winter just flipped. And nobody, not the gardeners, not the homeowners, not the farmers whose fruit trees are blooming 3 weeks early, is ready for what comes next. Let us start with the mechanism, because the Severe Weather Europe analysis published this April is the most precise public explanation of what is actually happening in the stratosphere right now, and the stratosphere is where this story begins. Every year, somewhere between March and May, the stratospheric polar vortex undergoes its final warming. This is the event where the stratosphere transitions from its winter state, cold, spinning rapidly, locking Arctic air in the polar region, to its summer state, warmer, winds reversing, the vortex dissolving into what scientists call its summer slumber mode. In a typical year, this final warming happens cleanly and quickly. The vortex winds spin down, the cold polar air disperses upward and laterally, and the transition to spring weather in the surface atmosphere below is relatively orderly. The cold retreats north, the warm air builds from the south, spring arrives on something close to schedule. But in 2026, the stratospheric polar vortex had already been severely weakened by a sudden stratospheric warming event in late 2025. The event that produced the explosive polar vortex disruption of January 2026 and the 170 deaths from cold across North America during the January 22nd to 27th outbreak. A polar vortex that has been disrupted, weakened, and stressed throughout a winter does not undergo a clean, orderly final warming. It fractures, it leaves fragments. And those fragments, pieces of the original cold vortex that have broken off and drifted southward into the troposphere, the lower atmosphere where your weather actually lives, are what Severe Weather Europe is describing when they write about the residual polar vortex core centered over North America and eastern Canada in April 2026. Not the vortex itself, a piece of it. A cold core fragment wandering around the mid-latitudes without the stratospheric structure that normally keeps it locked in the north, free to move southward under the right atmospheric conditions and deliver late-season cold to people who are standing in their gardens wondering why their tomato seedlings just got frost-killed. NASA's stratospheric wind analysis, referenced in the Severe Weather Europe April assessment, confirms the picture with the specific data that makes this more than a theoretical concern. The polar vortex winds in the stratosphere, which should be strongly westerly in winter, have been running near zero. Near zero means the vortex is dissolving, going, as Severe Weather Europe describes it, into its summer slumber mode. But here's the specific problem. The stratospheric final warming is not just the vortex winding down. It is the event that, in the weeks and months that follow, releases the cold air that was being contained. When the stratosphere warms rapidly and the vortex breaks down, it generates what climatologists call downward propagating waves. Disturbances that travel from the stratosphere down through the atmosphere to the surface over a period of weeks. These downward propagating waves are what cause the surface cold outbreaks that follow stratospheric warmings. The time lag between a stratospheric event and its surface expression is typically 2 to 6 weeks, which is precisely why the cold outbreaks of the first week of April and the cold snap of the third week of April and the AccuWeather warned additional cold snap before the end of the month are all mechanistically connected to the same stratospheric disruption that produced the January deep freeze. Here's what actually happened in the third week of April, the specific cold snap that AccuWeather's Alex Sosnowski documented in his April 17th report. After the first heat wave of 2026 peaked in the mid-Atlantic on April 17th with Washington, D.C. At 91 degrees, Baltimore at 93, Philadelphia at 91, all challenging records not seen since the early 2000s. A cross-country cold front swept into the picture. Not a gentle seasonal transition, a sharp temperature plunge. AccuWeather described it with the specific language that captures what this cold felt like from inside it. Readings from summer-like warmth to early spring chill in a span of 24 to 48 hours, bringing frost and freeze risks. Snow was seen falling and accumulating in parts of the Northeast on April 19th. Shorts and short-sleeve shirts gave way to long pants, fleece, and medium-weight jackets. Garden centers that had been selling tomato transplants the previous weekend were now fielding calls from customers asking how to protect plants they had already put in the ground. The answer, in most cases, it was too late. The agricultural damage dimension of a late-season freeze after a record warm early spring is something that the weather coverage consistently underweights relative to its actual economic and human significance. AccuWeather's April 17th report quoted Tim Anderson of the Michigan Farm Bureau. Several spells of unseasonably warm weather in recent weeks have accelerated blooming by up to 3 weeks, he said. The earlier buds and blossoms emerge in spring, the greater the risk of damage from a freeze, because the buds, having lost their winter cold hardiness during the warm period, are now fully exposed tissue that freezes at the same temperatures that would have left them undamaged a month earlier. Fruit trees in bloom, berry bushes with buds that have lost their winter hardiness, vines in early growth. A freeze at 28 degrees Fahrenheit on April 20th damages tissue that the same 28 degrees on March 5th would have left completely intact. This is not just a gardening problem. Michigan's cherry industry, one of the most valuable fruit crops in the Great Lakes region, lost significant portions of its crop during the late April freeze. Apple growers in the Hudson Valley, peach growers across the mid-Atlantic, strawberry growers from Ohio to New England, all of them are assessing damage and recalculating their yield expectations for the coming season. One cold night, after a warm early spring, can do what an entire winter of average cold would not. After a warm early spring, can do what an entire winter of average cold would not. And now, as the AccuWeather forecast for late April makes clear, the mechanism is not finished. Joe Pastlock, the AccuWeather long, a range forecaster, issued a specific warning that deserves to be read carefully. Due to atmospheric patterns in the northern Pacific, additional cool periods are possible later in April and into May. Additional cool periods later in April into May. After everything that has already happened, after the January deep freeze, the April mid-month cold snap, the frost on April 28th, lows in the 30s across the south as Wednesday's cold front sweeps through, there are more cold periods in the forecast, and the mechanism behind them is the same residual polar vortex core that Severe Weather Europe identified in its April assessment, a cold fragment that is wandering around the mid-latitudes, drifting under the influence of the large-scale atmospheric pattern rather than being locked in the north where it belongs, occasionally intersecting with the jet stream in ways that drive it south over North America. Each intersection is another cold snap. Each cold snap is another round of frozen garden beds, scrambled heating systems, and agricultural damage to crops that were blooming 3 weeks early because March was the warmest in 132 years. Here is the specific broader pattern that the Severe Weather Europe April analysis identifies as the governing framework for the rest of spring 2026, and it is the omega block. An omega block is a specific configuration of the large-scale atmospheric circulation, where a large ridge of high pressure is flanked on both sides by deep troughs of low pressure, creating a pattern that resembles the Greek letter omega. Omega block patterns are characterized by their persistence. They can lock a given area into the same weather regime for days or weeks at a time, and by their tendency to drive cold air southward on their eastern flank while trapping warm air on their western flank. The severe weather Europe analysis forecasts the potential for an omega block to emerge as the atmosphere resets for the remainder of the spring season, a pattern that, if it establishes, could extend the volatile, alternating warm then cold character of April 2026 well into May, with deep troughs periodically delivering late-season cold to the central and eastern United States, while the western ridge maintains above-average warmth. This is the atmospheric architecture of spring whiplash. It is not a new phenomenon. It is the manifestation, in 2026's specific conditions, of the same jet stream instability that climate scientists have been documenting across the past decade as a consequence of Arctic amplification. A warming Arctic reduces the temperature, difference between polar and mid-latitude air masses. A reduced temperature difference weakens the jet stream. A weakened jet stream makes larger north-south excursions, and those excursions are the omega blocks, the deep troughs, the cold core fragments that deliver February-level temperatures to people who are gardening in April. The warmest March on record was not an anomaly that the atmosphere subsequently forgot. It was a data point on a trend that also produces the cold that follows it, because in a destabilized jet stream, what goes wildly warm also goes wildly cold, And the timing of the cold no longer respects the seasonal calendar that human infrastructure has organized itself around. Nobody is ready for this because nobody has completely updated their mental model of what April means. April used to mean reliably above freezing nights in most of the continental United States, east of the Rockies. April used to mean that if you waited until mid-month to put in your vegetable transplants, you were safe. April used to mean that the winter coat was, by the 20th of the month, confidently in storage. In 2026, April means 91 degrees in Washington on the 17th and snow accumulating on the 19th. It means fruit blossoms frozen by a late cold snap that the SPC's daily severe weather products were simultaneously tracking alongside tornado watches in Oklahoma. It means AccuWeather warning of another substantial cold snap before the month ends, while the same AccuWeather forecast shows temperatures rebounding to 80 degrees in Washington by Wednesday. The temperature swing from Monday to Wednesday in the American East this week covers 25 degrees in less than 48 hours. From frost risk at dawn to near summer warmth by midday, back to below average by the weekend. Here is what to do about it, practically, specifically right now. If you have plants in the ground that were set out during the early April warmth, tomatoes, peppers, basil, tender annuals, monitor the AccuWeather and National Weather Service forecast for your specific location daily. Any forecast low below 35 degrees Fahrenheit in your area is a night to cover your plants. Any forecast low below 32 is a night to cover them and add additional insulation or to bring potted plants inside entirely. Row cover fabric, the spun-bonded polypropylene sold at garden centers, provides approximately 4 degrees of frost protection per layer. A double layer gets you to approximately 8 degrees of protection, which is enough to protect against a typical late April frost, but not against a hard freeze below 28. Know the difference and calibrate your protection accordingly. If you are a homeowner who turned off your furnace and switched fully to cooling mode during the April heat, do not assume you are done with heating for the season. Keep your thermostat set to a minimum of 55 degrees to protect pipes, even during the mild days. The cold snaps that are coming before the end of April and potentially into May can, in well-insulated homes, be managed without the heating system running continuously. But the thermostat should not be fully off, because overnight lows in the 30s to lower 40s in parts of the north central and northeastern United States are still in the forecast multiple times before May is established. And here is the final word on what this volatile, unpredictable, late-season cold pattern is actually telling you, beyond the weather forecast, beyond the planting calendar, beyond the pipe protection advice. It is telling you that the atmospheric system that has governed every spring in recorded human history no longer works the way it used to. A residual polar vortex core wandering the mid-latitudes in late April, delivering cold snaps to people who are watching tomato plants frost kill between heat waves, is not an aberration in the climate system. It is the climate system operating exactly as physics predicts it will when a warming Arctic reduces the jet stream's coherence and allows cold air to escape its northern containment on irregular, unpredictable schedules. Winter did not just flip once in April 2026. It has been flipping all season. And AccuWeather is telling you it will flip again before the month is out. Nobody's ready. Nobody ever quite is.